This video is sponsored by Dev Mountain. If you're interested in learning web development, iOS, or UX design, Dev Mountain is a 12-week design and development bootcamp intended to get you a full-time position in the industry. To learn more, visit devmountain.com or click the link in the description below. What's going on, guys? So in this video series, we're going to be building a React application that finds lyrics for songs. Okay, so we can search for a song, we can get the lyrics, and we're able to do this because we're using the Musixmatch API. Okay, this is the developer site for Musixmatch, and as far as the API goes, it's free for 2,000 API calls per day. If you want more than that, you're going to have to pay. And if you want access to all of the lyrics, you also have to pay. So with the free plan, you get access to 30% of the lyrics. So basically, it's like it's for development, testing, learning, stuff like that. And that's all we're doing here. We're not building a production level app that we're selling or anything like that. So that's fine. So you will have to sign up at developer.musixmatch.com. And if you just hit get started for the free plan and go to applications, you'll get your API key, and you need this when you make requests to the API. All right, so let's give it a shot. Now, this is the search form. On the landing page, we have the top 10 tracks. Okay, so just basically like 10 of the more popular songs that are out right now. And then it has the artist, the track name, the album name. If we click view lyrics, it'll take us to a lyrics page. Okay, we're using React Router, and we get, like it says, 30% of the lyrics. If you want all of them, then you'd have to pay for a plan. All of these third-party data sources, when you use them, it costs them money because every time someone uses your app, it hits their servers and uses their resources, so naturally you're going to have to pay. So we have our lyrics, we have the album ID, the genre, if it's explicit, if it has any swears in it or anything, release date, we're going to use React Moment to format the date, and if we want to search for a song, like let's say The Unforgiven, which is a Metallica song, probably showing my age here, and you'll see that we get some results here. Okay, so The Unforgiven, if I click View Lyrics, we can get the lyrics for that. We also have a nice little spinner graphic. All right, so that's what we'll be building, guys. Let's go ahead and get into it. All right, so I have VS Code open here, and we're going to generate our application using Create React App. Now, as far as state management, what I'm going to do is use the context API. Okay, we're not going to use Redux. I think this is a good example of a smaller application where the context API is a nice solution. I mean, you could build it without even using that, but you have to kind of pass along from the search. You know, when you do a search with the search component, you have to get that data into the tracks component, and it's just it's kind of tedious. So I think it's a good application to use the context API. Okay, so I'm actually going to use npx to use Create React App, and if you don't know what npx is, it's available with npm 5 plus, I believe, and it allows us to use Create React App and things like that, tools like that, without having to actually install them globally on our machine. So I can simply say npx Create React App, and I want to generate everything in this folder, so I'm just going to put a dot. Okay, and I noticed it does take a little longer to generate when you use npx, but you don't have to install it on your system, which is a plus. And you always get the latest version. Okay. Okay, so that should be done any second. And just make sure that you sign up at developer.musicmatch so that you can get your API key, because we will need that to make our requests. All right, so now that that's done, let's go ahead and run our server. So we'll say npm start. And by the way, this isn't like I already have something on port 3000, the original application. So I'm just going to say yes here, and it's going to run it on 3001. And we'll just get the default React boilerplate here. Now, this isn't an intro to React. If you don't know anything about React, I would suggest watching, my YouTube crash course, or even better, taking my Udemy course, React Front to Back, where we start from, absolute scratch, and we talk all about components and properties and state and all that stuff. and we build a project. So that is, I'll put that in the description with a link for just $9.99. All right, so now that we have our server running, let's clean stuff up a little bit. I usually do a little bit of house cleaning with Create React App. We don't need the logo here, so let's delete that. The SVG. We don't need index.css. We can delete that. And it's going to break, by the way. You can see the server's not running anymore. Well, it's running, but it failed to compile. And that's because we just deleted those files, and some of these files are looking for those. So index.js, you want to delete this right here, the import of index.css, because we just deleted that file, so obviously we don't want to import it. App.js, we're going to delete the import of the logo because we just deleted that. And then for the render, I just want the outer div, and then I'm just going to put an H1 in here and say hello and save. All right, so now our server is running correctly. Let's check our application. We should just see hello. One other thing I like to do is go into the app CSS and just get rid of all that styling. Okay, I keep the file, but just get rid of the styling. And now it should just look like this. Okay, so we are going to use Bootstrap and Font Awesome in this application. So let's go to Get Bootstrap and get started, and we're just going to get the CSS. We don't need the JavaScript for anything, so we'll just grab the CSS here, and let's go into our public index HTML, and I'm just going to get rid of these comments. So we'll get rid of those, and I'll also change the title to, this is called Lyric Finder. We'll just put a little slogan here. We'll say find lyrics for your favorite songs, and we'll paste the Bootstrap link right here, and then we just need to get the Font Awesome link. So let's go to fontawesome.com. We'll go to how to use and then grab the link right here, close that up and paste that into the index file right there, and we should be good. So we'll save that and close it up. If we go back to our application, the title is changed, and you can also see that the Bootstrap styling is in effect. All right, so what we're going to do first is create the header or the navbar component, because that's very simple. There's nothing to that really. We'll add that. We'll install the React router. Let me just show you kind of how this is structured. Okay, so we have React router installed, and all of this, so the search, the tracks, this is all inside of an index component, okay? And the index component is going to display on the root route or the home route, okay? So we have the search component embedded inside the index, and then we have tracks, okay? This whole thing right here is the tracks component, and then we're going to loop through the track list, which is going to be in the state, and then output each one of these tracks, okay? So this is a track component, singular. Okay, so we'll loop through, we'll output the track component, pass in the properties from the state, and then it'll display this stuff here. Okay, and then when we click View Lyrics, that actually goes to the lyrics component using React Router. Okay, so that's the plan. Let's see, so yeah, we'll go ahead and just create the simple navbar component. So in the source folder, let's create a folder called Components. Not a file, I just created a file. We want a folder, and we want it in the source. Jesus. Okay, so source components, and then let's create a file called, actually, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a folder instead in components called layout. And that's where I want to put like things like the navbar, the spinner, the index, things like that. And then we'll have another folder that has like the tracks component, the search, the lyrics component, anything to do with the API. Okay, so in layout, let's create a file called navbar.js, capital N. All your component names should be uppercase. Now, this is going to be a functional component, and I'm actually using an extension here for VS Code called ES7 React Redux GraphQL React Native snippets, and it has a bunch of helpful little snippets that you can use to do things like generate a class-based component or a functional component, etc. So I'm going to use that and just do RFC tab, and it'll give me a functional component, okay, which is just a function, an arrow function. And I'm going to just take the export default, cut that out, and just do a const. I'm going to call this navbar equals the function, and then just export it down here as navbar. Okay, I think that looks better. And I use semicolons. You don't have to if you don't want to. It seems like it's becoming more popular to not use semicolons, but I like them, so it's your preference. And I have Prettier installed, which actually, if I save it without a semicolon, it'll put it there automatically. Okay, Prettier is another extension I would highly recommend for VS Code. So our navbar is going to be really simple. We're going to return a nav tag. Okay, and this nav, actually let's put parentheses around this. Oops. So this nav tag is also going to have some classes. We're using React, so of course we need to use class name, and we're going to say navbar. Let's do navbar dark, bg dark for the background, which will make it black, and mb-5, which is margin bottom 5. Alright, so inside here we're going to have a span with the class of navbar-brand. Let's also do mb0, margin bottom 0, and I want it to display as an h1, so I'm going to do h1 as a class. And I also want to put a class of mx-auto, which is margin auto on the left and right on the x-axis. And this is just a Bootstrap class. This will put it in the middle, okay? And we just want to say lyric finder. Okay, so we'll save that, and that should be all set for that component. Now let's go to app.js and bring it in. So we'll say import navbar. Actually, with this extension that I have installed, we can do imp tab, and it'll kind of set up the boilerplate for an import. And then here we can just say we want to go ./component/layout/navbar. All right, and then we want to import navbar. Okay, and then I'm just going to replace the h1 down here with navbar. Okay, so that will display that component. Let's check it out, and let's go to our version, and there it is. Okay, so very, very simple. Next thing we're going to do is start to set up the index component, which holds all of this stuff, because that's going to be connected to the home route. So we might as well install the React router now. So I'm just going to stop the server real quick and just do an npm install react-router-dom, which will install the version 4 of React Router. All right, so now that that's installed, let's go ahead and run the server again and say yes. Okay, so now we have React Router installed. Let's set that up in app.js. So what I'll do is go up here and say import. Actually, let's do imp tab. We want to bring this in from React Router DOM. And let's see, we're going to bring in a couple things. So we're going to use some curly braces, and we want to bring in browser router, but I'm going to use an alias. So I'm going to say as router. Okay, and then we're also going to bring in route, and we're going to bring in switch. Okay, and I'm not going to explain everything like how the router works and all that. This is more of just a project video or series. Like I said, the React front to back course, we go over that stuff more in depth. All right, so now that we've imported this stuff, we need browser router to wrap around everything. Okay, but I used an alias of router, so we can go down here and we can just say router and just surround everything within this return. So router. Okay, and then what else do we want to do here? I don't actually need this div, like I don't need a div element in the DOM, so instead I'm going to use a React fragment. So we'll say React fragment, which is kind of just like a fake DOM element. It's not going to show in the actual DOM. Whoops, not create context. I'm not doing that yet. Fragment. All right. So we have our navbar. Now, the navbar is going to be on every page, so that's not going to be like in any specific route. We can keep it here. Everything that shows up under the navbar needs to be in a container. You see how like everything is pushed over in the middle. If we don't use a container, it's going to spread all the way out to here, and we don't want that. So let's go ahead and put a container class, just a Bootstrap class, and then we're going to put in a switch to surround all of our routes. All right, so we'll do that, and then to create, to create a route, we just want to do route, and let's say exact. We want it to match our path exactly, and the path is going to be a slash, and then the component is going to be the index component, which we haven't created yet, but we will in a second. Okay. If I go ahead and save this, we're going to get an error because index is not defined. So we will have to bring in index. Even though I haven't created it yet, we'll just go ahead and bring it in. I'll copy this down. I am going to put it in the layout because it doesn't really have any functionality other than holding other components. So it is basically part of just the layout. So we'll bring in index. Okay, we'll still get an error because we haven't created the file yet. So in layout, let's create a file called index.js, capital I. Okay, and index is going to be a functional component, so I'm going to do RFC tab, and I'm just going to cut that and say const index equals, go like that. All right, now this is going to hold our, it's going to hold our search component and our tracks component, okay? But the search we're going to do later. First, I just want to get the tracks to display those top 10 tracks. That's the first goal. So let's import tracks from, and we haven't created this yet, but we will. Let's import tracks from, let's see, we want to go out of the layout folder into a folder called tracks, which I'll create, and then a component called tracks. Oops. Okay, and then we'll display that in here. We don't need a div here, so let's just use a React fragment. Okay, and then in here we'll put in our tracks component, which we haven't created just yet. Okay, so for the tracks component, I'm going to create a folder in components, not a file. So in components, create a folder called tracks, lowercase t, and then this is where I'm going to put any components that have to do with the API, like the search, the lyrics, the tracks, the track component, all that stuff will go in this folder. So let's create an uppercase T tracks.js. That's going to be our tracks component. And this is actually going to be a class-based component. So I'm going to do rcc tab. Again, if you don't have this extension, just go ahead and copy this, except I'm going to get rid of the export default and put it down here and just export the class name. All right, and for now, we'll put an H1 in here and just say tracks just to make sure that it gets displayed. Okay, so let's go to our browser, let's go to our app, and there we go. So we get our tracks displayed. If I open up my Chrome tools and go to the React extension, or the React Chrome extension, which you should have installed, and we look in the router, let's see, we have our navbar component, and then we have our switch with our route. Okay, so this is the index component right here, and inside that we have our tracks component. All right, good. So now we have to start to think about state, and we could put the tracks, the state inside the tracks component, but I don't want to do that. I want a global point of reference, a global state. So that's why we're going to use the context API. Okay, so we're going to create in the let's see, in the source folder, we're going to create a file called context.js. Okay. Is it in the root? Yeah, context.js. So the way that this works is we create what's called a provider, and the provider is just like any other React component. We're just going to wrap everything in this provider component. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll do an RCC tab, which is just to create a class-based component. We're going to call the class provider. And we're not going to export default. We are going to export this class, but not as default, okay? Because we're actually going to export a consumer from this as well. And I'll talk about what that is in a second. So let's see. For the render, we want to return a context.provider. Okay, and actually one thing I forgot to do is create the context. So up here, what we have to do is create a variable called context, and we're going to set that to react.createContext. Okay, and then we're putting this in the return, the context provider. And then the only thing that's going to go in here is an expression with this.props.children. Okay, because this is the provider is going to wrap around every other component so that we can access whatever state we put in this provider. We'll be able to access with, through all the other components as long as we use what's called a consumer. Okay, so for our state, let's go up here, just like any other component. We're just going to add state. You could use a constructor, but there's really no reason to here. So our state is just going to have a lyrics underscore, I'm sorry, not lyrics. It's going to be a track underscore list, which is going to be an array. Okay, so when we look at our final application, this is the track list. Okay, so it's going to be 10 tracks, whether it's what we search for or the top 10 tracks when we land on the page. Okay, the idea is once we search, this should change into whatever the response gives us back. That should change the state of the tracks. Okay, so let's go back and let's see. So we have track lists. Before I do any kind of request to the Musixmatch and we get the response back, let's just put in some dummy data to work with. So just an object. And the way that the data is formatted when it comes back from the API is you'll have an object and then you'll have track, which will be another object. And let's just do track underscore name, and we'll just say ABC, and then we'll put this down. So we're going to delete this after. I'm just using this as just dummy data for now. So that's our track list. All right, now this is in the provider state, but we want to be able to access this from any component. So in the context provider, we can provide a value and we can pass whatever we want into this. I'm going to pass the entire state. Okay, now you could pass in this.state.trackList if that's all you wanted available, but I want the entire state available. In fact, I'm going to put a heading value in the state as well. Okay, and this is going to be a string, and we're going to say top 10 tracks. Okay, now the reason for the heading, if we look at our application, when we come it says top 10 tracks, but once I do a search, that should change to search results, okay, instead of top 10 tracks. So that's going to be part of the state that can change when we make a search. All right, so I think we're good here. Oh, we have to export the consumer. So we're going to say down here, export, let's say const consumer. And we're going to set this equal to, we're going to take the context and say dot consumer. Okay. Actually, that should be a uppercase C. So context dot consumer. And then this is actually what we import into our component. to be able to access the state from the context. So it's similar to connect with Redux. At least to me, that's what I find. Whenever you use Redux and you want to use the global state, you import connect and you use that in your component to be able to map state to props and so on. So it's kind of similar to that. So I think that this looks good for now. I mean, obviously we're going to fetch the data from the API and that's what's going to go in this track list, but for now we'll just use this dummy data. My goal now is to go to our tracks component and bring in that global state, those tracks. So to do that, we actually have to import a consumer. Okay, we want to import consumer from that context file, which is, let's see, where are we? We're in tracks, so // context. Okay, so we bring in the consumer, and then to use that, we actually have to return it down here. So I'm going to get rid of this for now, and we're going to say consumer. Okay, so we want to return consumer, and then in here, what we do is put an expression, and we put an arrow function with a value. Okay, so we're going to go like that. Now this value is whatever we pass here. Okay, so I happen to pass the entire state. I could pass just, whatever I want really, but that's what's going to be in this value, and we'll have access to it within this component. Okay, so we don't have to pass things around. Even if this component was 5 levels deep, we could still access it the same exact way from the context, and that's really the beauty of this context API. So let's do, just to show you, let's do a console.log of the value, and then as we have to return something here to our interface. So let's do. We'll just do an H1, just like we had that says tracks. Okay, but now we have access to the value from the context. So let's save this. Let's go back to our application, and let's go to our console. Undefined. Oh, jeez. I forgot the most important part. It has no idea what anything is, because in our app.js we have to wrap everything here in the provider. Okay, just like you would with Redux. Usually with Redux you do provider and then you pass in your state. We don't have to do that, but we do have to do the provider. So let's bring that in. Can't believe I forgot that. So we'll say import provider from /context. Okay, because remember, in context we exported the class of provider, so that needs to wrap around everything, even the router. So we want to put provider. All right, so let's save that. Export default imported as provider. That's because provider needs to be in curly braces, because it's not a default export. All right, so now let's go back to, and there we go. So now our value, console logging our value, we get our track list with our 2 dummy tracks, and we also get the heading of top 10 tracks, so the whole state. So we're accessing the entire state from the tracks component, and we could do this from any component we want. All right, so let's go back. Now, instead of just having dummy data in our context and our state here, let's make a request to the Musixmatch API and fill this with real data. So to do that, just like any other component, we're going to use component did mount, which is a lifecycle method that's available with any React component, class-based component, because it comes from here. And it just runs when the component mounts. Now we're going to use Axios to make our request, so we have to install that. So I'm going to stop the server real quick and do an npm install Axios. You could use the fetch API if you want, or something else, just anything to make requests. Okay, now we'll start the server back up. Yes. All right, so let's see. Let's bring in Axios. And then in component did mount, first of all, I'm going to just clear everything out of the track list just so it's an empty array, like that. And then in component did mount, we'll say axios.get. Okay, that's going to give us a promise back, so we need a dot then, and then if there's an error, that will be in the dot catch. Okay, so we'll say error console.log error. And in the dot then, for now, I'm just going to also console log the result. Okay, so whatever it gives us, console.log the result dot data. Okay, when you use Axios, you want to use res.data. So the URL, there's going to be quite a bit here. I'm going to put in some backticks to use a template string. And let's see, let's go to the API. So this is my API key, right? And you get this by going to plans, get started on the free plan, and then applications. Now, I'm going to put this inside of what's called an environment variable or an environmental variable in React. So I'm going to create a file in the root, not in the source, but in the absolute root, a file called .env. Okay, and here is where we can put basically variables that we can access from anywhere in our application. Now they have to start with React_app, and then you can do whatever you want. I'm going to do key, and then I'm going to just paste in my key and save it. That way I can just access it wherever and whenever I want. All right, so now that that's in there, let's go back to our little axios.get, and the URL that we want, if we go to the documentation, let's see. So these are all the API methods, and we're going to use quite a few of these. We're going to use this one here, charttracks.get. This will get the top songs in any given country. So that's actually what we're using for the home page, for the landing page. You can see all the different parameters you can use. We're going to use the US as a country. You can set the page size. We're going to use 10. So we'll get 10 songs or tracks. Gives you an example of the response. When we do a search, we use right here, track.search. That gives you all the different parameters. You can search by certain genres, and you could make a much more extensive application if you wanted to. And then for the lyrics, we have track.lyrics.get. Okay. I think that's all we're going to be using. Track.get, I think we'll use that as well. But let's start off with the top 10, which is going to be chart.tracks.get. Okay, now in addition to this, we need the core domain, which is let's see, where is this? Let's see, API methods right here. So this is the core domain. It's API Musixmatch ws/1.1. So let's grab that first and put that in here. All right, then we want that chart tracks get thing. So let's go back there and grab this. So we'll copy that and let's put that right in here. Now I'm going to change the page size to 10, and I'm going to change the country to US. Okay, now we have to add our API key to all of our requests. So we're going to do ampersand API key equals, and then our API key. Now remember, I put mine in an env file, so to access it and to use a variable in a template string, we use this syntax, and we can say process.env.react_app_mm_key. Okay, so that will get our API key, and I think we have to reset the server after creating an environmental variable. So let's save this, and then this should run as soon as the tracks component runs, or as soon as the provider runs. So I'm just going to restart the server real quick. So npm start. Okay, so it's making the request, but it's giving us this no access control allow origin. I'm sure you guys have seen this plenty of times. It has to do with cores and what they allow. I'm not sure why this API does this. And there's a few ways around it. I'm gonna use a really easy way and use something called cores anywhere. So if we go to HTTPS cores anywhere, this is a little trick. coresanywhere.herokuapp.com. It's basically kind of like a proxy that we can just stick in front of the URL and it will work. And it gives you some information here. But let's grab this URL. So it's cores-anywhere.herokuapp. And we're going to just put this right in front of the URL here in the GET request, like that. And now if I save and we go back to our application, there we go. Wait a minute, there we don't go. Yep, there it is. So it just takes a second to fetch. So what we'll do is we'll have a spinner, and then when it gets back to us, then we'll display the tracks. But this is our response. Okay, so if we look in message, body, track list, there's 10 tracks because remember we put 10 in the query parameters. And each track gives us all this information. Okay, so it gives us like the artist name, the album name, the track name, all that stuff, the release date, if it's explicit lyrics or not. So pretty cool. It gives us a lot of stuff, genres. So that's good. We're getting the requests. Now, all we're doing now when we get the request back, or I'm sorry, the response back, is console logging it. What we want to do is set that to our state. We want to take that response, that track list in the response, and fill our state with it, which is this. Okay, so I'm actually just going to put some curly braces here so that I can use more than one line. So we're going to put this on separate lines like that, because I still want to log the data just to see what we're working with, but then I also want to set the state. So we'll say this dot set state, and we're going to set track list. Yeah, track list, and we want to set it to res.data. Now, we don't want just res.data because remember what that gives us. It gives us message and then body and then the track list. So res.data.message.body.tracklist. So that'll put the 10 tracks in our state. All right, so let's actually comment this console log out and save, because in our tracks component we're console logging the value, and I want to show you what we get from that. So I'm just going to reload. Okay, so when we look at what we're getting here, we get, this happens twice, okay? And if you've used React before and you've dealt with making requests to outside APIs, you probably know about this. But basically, first it's going to just render the track list as the initial blank array that we set, and then when the data comes back, it's filled. Okay, so we have to account for this. Basically, in our component, we have to have a conditional checking to see if this is here and if it's full. If it's not full, as it is here when we get the response back, we want to show a spinner graphic, a spinner component. As soon as it comes in, then we want to show the tracks. Okay, so we have to account for that. So in our tracks, actually let's create our spinner component. So in layout, I'm going to create a file called spinner.js. And if you've taken my React front-to-back course or my MERN-Stack front-to-back course, I usually use the same spinner component. I'm actually going to just paste it in. Okay, so I have a GIF file, which I'm going to grab in a second. It's just a little rotating spinner. And then we just have a functional component that is an image, and the source is going to be set to, of course, the GIF, the image file. The alt will just do loading in case for some reason the spinner doesn't show. And then a little bit of inline React styling, setting the width, the margin, and the display to block. Okay, so the margin will make it so that the spinner is right in the middle. So let's save that, and let me just grab that that spinner graphic real quick. So let's see. I know you guys can't see what I'm doing. All right, so this is the project folder, and the spinner graphic is going to go right in the components layout folder, right next to the spinner component. There it is, and you can get this in the GitHub repository in the description. Okay, so now that we have our spinner component, let's bring that into tracks. So we'll import spinner from, and we're going to go outside of tracks into layout and then spinner. Okay, now down here we have to basically check for we want to check two things. We want to see if the tracks are there, if it's defined, and if the array is empty or not. Okay, if the array is empty, which it will be on the first response or the first log, then we want to show the spinner. Okay, so let's get rid of this and let's put an if else. Okay, now I could do if value dot track list. I could do that, but I'm actually going to use destructuring so that I don't have to put value dot in front of everything. So the way that we do this is we just say const, use some curly braces, and we want to pull out track list. We want to pull track list out of that value, okay? And then we only have to use track list like that. Okay, so we want to say if track list is equal to undefined, or, so double pipe character, or track list dot length, which will give us the length of the array. If that is equal to 0, then we want to show the spinner, right? Because there's no tracks to show. So let's do return spinner like that. Okay, and then else, for now, I'm just going to return whatever, an H1, and we'll just say tracks loaded. Okay, so let's try that out. We'll go back. Okay, so now when I reload, before it fetches or before it gets the response back from the API, it's going to show the spinner. Once it comes in, then it'll show the tracks loaded. Okay. Obviously, we don't want to just show tracks loaded. What we want to show is this right here. Okay. Let's see. So what do I want to do now? We need to loop through the tracks that we get back, the array, and then output a single track component. All right, so let's do that. Let's create our track component. So inside components tracks, we'll create a file called uppercase T track.js. Okay, and this track component is actually going to be a functional component because it doesn't need its own state. We just pass in the tracks as a prop. Okay, so we do have to add props right here, like that. All right, and I'm just going to move this down. So I'm going to say const track equals, and then down here, export default track. Okay, so let's see. We want to actually, in the tracks component, we're going to return, let's put some parentheses here. And we want to put a div with the class of row because what we're doing is using the Bootstrap grid to have two 6-column divs. So we have two tracks against each other, as you can see right here. So 6-column div, 6-column div, and they need to be inside of a row. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, so tracks. Div class row, do I want to, oh, you know what? I want to have the H3 that says the top 10 tracks, and I want that above the row. So what we'll do is wrap this in a React fragment. Oops, like that. And then let's put an H3 here, and I'm just gonna give this a class name of text center, and then I also want to move things down a bit, so MB4, and then what's gonna go here is the heading that's in the state. Okay, now that's gonna be in this value, so I can pull that out as well by going like that, and then just simply putting in heading. Okay. And then inside this row is where we want to basically loop through or map through our tracks that come from the state. So basically this track list, we want to map through and output a track component. So let's do that real quick. So we'll put in an expression here, and we're going to say track underscore list, and then we want to map through these. Okay, so we're going to map through this list, and I'm going to call each one item. We're going to use an arrow here. And then we want to render a track component for each one. Okay, and I need to import track up here. So let's see, I'll copy that down, and this is going to be in track/track. Okay, so what's going on is we're looping through the track list, and for each one we want to output a track. Now this track component needs to know what to display. It needs to know like the album, the artist name, the track name, stuff like that. That's all going to come from this item right here. Okay, now remember, each object in this array has track and then another object. So we want to say track equals item dot track. Okay, now if we leave it like this, it's going to complain it doesn't have a key. Whenever you map through a list, you need to have a unique key. So for our key, we're just going to use the item dot track, and then there's something called a track underscore ID. Okay, so we'll save that. And then let's go back to track.js, because right now we have nothing to display. So we're going to add this stuff now. So in props, since we passed in right here track as a prop, then we have access to props.track. Now instead of having to use props.track everywhere, I'm going to just use destructuring. I'm going to pull out track, the track property, from props. Okay, and then down here, let's see, we're going to return a div with the class name of call-md-6. Okay, then we're going to put everything in a card, so a Bootstrap card. So let's do a class of card and a class of margin bottom 4 and a class of shadow-sm. And then in here we need a class of card-body, which gives the card all the padding and stuff. And inside the body we can put an h5, and we're going to put the artist name here, which we can get from track. Oops, we need our curly braces. So track.artist underscore name. So let's try this out. Let's save it and let's go back to our application, and there we go. So we get our top 10 tracks, and each object in the track list is we're looping through and we're outputting a track component. So each of these is a track component, which right now we only have the artist name. Okay, I'm going to go back to the context and just make sure I console log the response just so we see what we're working with. So I'm going to uncomment that and go back, and now we can see in our track list. Okay, so we have all this information. So we used artist name right here. That's what we're seeing here. And then for the key, we use track ID. Remember the unique key? That's what we use for that. All right, so let's finish this up. So we'll go back to track.js. Let's go under our H5. And let's put a paragraph with the class of card-text. Okay, so this is just standard Bootstrap card markup. And we're going to put a strong tag. And we're going to say track. But I want to put an icon right before it. So I'm going to say i.fas, so font awesome. And then we're going to use the fa-play icon. So it should look like that. Okay, and then we'll put a colon after the strong, and then we want the track name. So we can get that with track.track_name. All right, and then we want to do the artist. I'm sorry, not the artist, the album name. We already have the artist. So I'm going to copy this line here. I'm going to put in a line break and then paste it in. Change the icon to fa-compact-disc. Remember those? And then change this to album. And then let's change, we'll say track.album name, because that is available to us. Okay, so then under the paragraph, we want to have a button to go to the View Lyrics page, which we haven't created yet, but we will create the button. Now, when you're using React Router, you don't want to use an A tag. You want to use a link from React Router. So we have to import link from React Router DOM. Okay, and then down here, we can use a link tag, which takes in a to attribute, which is basically like an href, except we're going to make this dynamic. So we're going to put in curly braces with backticks, and we want to go to lyrics /track/ and then we want to put in a variable because we want the track ID, which we can get with track.track_ID. Okay, and that's not going to go anywhere yet because we haven't created the route, but we will a little later. Okay, and then within the link, let's put an icon, a chevron. So I'm going to do FAS and then FA-chevron-right. And then next to that, we're just going to say view lyrics. And this link, we also want to add a couple Bootstrap classes too. So we'll say class name, btn dash. Let's do dark, and then let's do btn block so that it goes all the way across. Save it. My prettier extension kind of just prettiers things up. And there we go. So we have our top 10 tracks. We have our little icons. It gives us the artist name, the track name, and the album name. View lyrics, it's not going to show anything because we haven't created that route or that component yet. But this is working. If I reload, we get our spinner. Once it gets the response, sometimes it takes longer than others. Also depends on your network. I don't know why that's taking so long. That's weird. Why is that taking so long? There's no way I hit to my 2000 cap. There we go. All right, so oh well. So it takes a little bit, but it's weird because like yesterday it was very fast. So I guess it just depends on your connection and time of day and stuff like that. But I think that's going to be it for this video, guys. In the next video, we're going to start to create the search, okay, the search component, and we're going to basically create in our state. We're going to have a dispatch function to be able to manipulate our state from other components, because when we search, we want this track list to completely change. We want to make a new request to the API, get it back, and then change the tracks. So that's what we're going to do next. All right, thanks for watching, guys, and if you like this video, if you like this series, please leave a like, and I will see you next time.